She said she was working late. I believed her, until the night I opened her office door and saw everything. She said she wanted a fresh start. A brand new chapter. But what she never realized was that chasing that new life would end up costing her everything she'd spent years building. Eventually, I uploaded the picture. I won't sugarcoat it, it felt like a low blow. But honestly, by then guilt had no place left in me. What I did wasn't cruel. It was honest. The people cheering her on, investing in her future, they deserved to know exactly who they were standing behind. I paused before hitting send. Not because I had second thoughts, but because it was a hard habit to break. A part of me still remembered the Rachel I first fell in love with. The woman I stood at the altar with. The woman who used to gaze at me like I was her entire world. But that version of her? She disappeared long before I ever boarded a plane to Paris. That woman had looked me dead in the eyes, lied without flinching, and still asked me to love her through it. So I clicked send. Then I shut the laptop, leaned back in my chair, and exhaled a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding in my chest for weeks. I figured it wouldn't take long. Her employer wasn't just some startup. They had a solid reputation in the culinary world. I doubted they'd want to be caught up in even a hint of scandal. I figured they'd yank the funding. Maybe even cut her loose entirely. That scholarship she kept bragging about, that once-in-a-lifetime gig in Paris? I doubted it would survive the blow. The next morning, I went through the motions, got dressed, grabbed my usual coffee, drove to the office. But everything felt different. Lighter. I knew I wasn't out of the woods yet, but for the first time in a long time, I saw a path ahead. My whole world had been flipped upside down, but I had finally stopped waiting for someone else to rescue me from the wreckage. Sure, I was still angry, but under that anger was something steadier. A sense of clarity. Of taking back control. I wasn't powerless anymore. When I got to my desk, I decided to go one step further. Rachel's company had always been loud about their pride in her. They once even contacted me, asking if I'd help them put together a promotional piece. They wanted to highlight how their employees were creating impact abroad, a glossy, feel-good campaign with Rachel right at the center. At the time, I had felt proud. Honored even. Now, that pride felt fake, hollowed out. I visited their website. There she was, front and center, all smiles in her white chef's jacket, beneath a banner that read something about dedication and perseverance. I stared at that image for a solid minute. Then I dragged it onto a flash drive. I also printed a copy and scribbled one sentence on the back. Here's the truth about your investment. No return address. No message. I mailed it straight to their headquarters. I didn't know how they'd react, and frankly, I didn't need to. A photo like that? It didn't need any extra words. Days passed. I kept to myself, didn't try to reach out to her. I figured by now the chain reaction had started. And then one morning I was sipping coffee at work when my phone buzzed. It was an email from an old acquaintance who worked on the PR team at Rachel's company. Just 5 words. You're not going to believe this. They were cutting her loose. Pulling the funding. Launching an internal investigation. In short, she was finished. I stared at the screen for a moment, letting it all settle. It was over. Every lie she'd told, every illusion she'd maintained, I had pulled them apart one by one. And not once did I feel regret. Later that day, I leaned back in my chair and looked out the office window at the city below. It was the first moment in weeks that I felt still. Calm. The divorce was underway, smooth and clean, exactly how I'd hoped. My attorney and I had worked closely to make sure there weren't any cracks left in the paperwork, no loopholes, no paths back. I wasn't interested in patching things up. I wanted a fresh start. And I was getting it. Rachel's career? Done. She wasn't returning home from Paris as a rising star. She was coming back as a cautionary tale. Proof of how fast everything can unravel when you betray the people who believe in you. I pictured her sitting alone in that cramped little apartment overseas, suitcase by the door, phone full of unanswered calls, trying to make sense of everything she'd thrown away. Meanwhile, I was finally moving forward. I took on new projects at work. Started planning a solo trip, something I'd always dreamed of but never carved out the time for. I reconnected with old friends. Laughed more. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't walking on eggshells, waiting for the next excuse, the next lie, the next silence. Then one afternoon I was sitting at my favorite cafe, coffee warming my hands when my phone rang. Unknown number. I nearly ignored it. But something told me to answer. Jake, can we talk? It was Rachel. Her voice was fragile, barely above a whisper. She sounded like someone hanging by a thread. The fear, the desperation, it bled through every word. Gone was the confident, self-assured woman I'd once known. What was left was someone who had watched their entire life fall apart in real time. I didn't say anything. "Please," she said, "I know I ruined everything. I lost it all. I don't know what to do anymore. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I let the silence stretch. Then I answered, steady and quiet, "There's nothing left to say, Rachel. You made your decisions. Now you have to face what came with them." Her voice trembled. "I don't have anyone. I don't even know how to start over." And for a heartbeat I felt something stir. Not forgiveness. Not pity. Just something. But then I remembered what she did. I remembered that door, that suitcase, the way my heart had shattered like glass. "You'll figure it out," I said. And I meant it. "Goodbye, Rachel." I ended the call. Set my phone down. Took another sip of coffee. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about finally being at peace. I stepped out into the afternoon sun, and for the first time in what felt like ages, I actually felt its warmth. I didn't have a clear picture of what the future held, but I knew this much. I had made it through the worst of it. And from here on out, the road ahead was mine to walk. Rachel would have to live with what she'd done. And me? I was free. With each step, I left behind the ruins of the life she chose to set on fire. The first thing that really stood out was how often Rachel had started working late. Now, to be fair, her job had always been demanding, long hours weren't unusual. But out of nowhere, it felt like she was working late almost every single night. Around 5 or 6 in the evening she'd text me something vague like, "Just tying up a few things, don't wait up." And I wanted to be understanding. I know how unpredictable some jobs can be. But what kept gnawing at me was how vague she became. Whenever I asked what she was actually working on, she'd just kind of shrug and mutter, "Oh, the usual," without looking me in the eye. Then her phone habits changed. I mean, yeah, we all keep our phones nearby these days. That's not what threw me. It was the way Rachel suddenly became guarded with hers. She was glued to it more than ever, and if I walked into the room, she'd quickly flip it over or shove it into her purse like it had just caught fire. It wasn't just the constant use, it was the way she acted, like she was always hiding something. Like she was always one text away from being exposed. One evening, I tried to shake us out of the weird distance that had crept between us. I thought maybe a spontaneous date night would help. Something simple like dinner at that little Italian spot we used to love. She actually smiled when I suggested it, and for a second I thought maybe things were getting better. But then her phone buzzed. And everything in her face changed. She glanced at the screen and her expression just dropped. Well, distant. She said she had to make a quick call and stepped outside onto the porch. Through the window, I watched her pace nervously back and forth, phone pressed to her ear. I'm not proud of what I did next, but something in me couldn't let it go. I moved closer to the door, trying to catch bits of the conversation. Her voice was low, and it had this anxious edge I hadn't heard before. I picked up fragments, things like, "Not now," and "I'll figure it out." My stomach felt like it was twisting into knots. When she came back in, she forced a smile like she was in some play. "Sorry about that. Ready to go?" Like that whole moment on the porch hadn't just happened. We went out, but it was like sitting across from a stranger. We made small talk, the usual stuff, but there was this invisible wall between us. I could feel how tense she was, even as she tried to laugh at the waiter's jokes or talk about the food. And every time her phone buzzed, she'd glance at it like it was about to explode, then excuse herself to check it. I wanted to ask her who she'd called earlier. I wanted to ask why she looked so shaken. But I didn't. I kept telling myself I was being paranoid. That maybe work was just wearing her down. But deep down I felt like I was losing her. A few nights later, something strange happened. I was getting ready for bed and Rachel was already in bed, eyes shut, breathing steady, but something about it didn't feel real. Her phone was charging on the nightstand, and I noticed the notification light blinking. I know how that sounds, but curiosity, suspicion, got the better of me. I leaned over just to see who was messaging her at that hour. The name, Dan, lit up the screen. Just a first name. No last initial. No explanation. And the message read, "I miss you." I just sat there frozen. My heart sank so fast I could practically hear it hit the floor. I didn't know anyone named Dan in her life. She'd never mentioned him, not even in passing. And something about that simple message felt too intimate. Too wrong. I didn't wake her. I couldn't. Not yet. I needed to understand more before I confronted her. So I just sat in silence, staring at that screen, feeling the weight of something I didn't want to admit was happening. The next morning I tried to stay calm. I asked her if she had any plans for the weekend, like I was just making conversation. She looked caught off guard for a second, but then told me she might meet up with a friend. I asked which friend casually. And after a slight pause, barely noticeable but it was there, she said, "Oh, you know Laura." I did know Laura. We'd had dinner with her and her husband a few times. But the way Rachel said it, it sounded rehearsed. Like she had just picked a name from a list and hoped I wouldn't question it. That weekend she left around noon. Said she'd be back in the evening. At first I tried to go about my day but something didn't sit right. Around 4 p.m. I gave in and texted Laura. Nothing direct, just a casual, friendly message. "Hey, hope you two are having fun today." A few minutes later Laura replied, "Fun? Oh, we're not hanging out, been stuck at my desk all day with a project." I stared at her response for what felt like forever. Rachel had lied to me. And suddenly, all those little doubts and odd behaviors snapped together like puzzle pieces. This wasn't in my head. Something was happening and I was on the outside of it. I spent the rest of that day in a fog. I kept trying to find ways to explain it. Maybe Rachel had changed plans last minute. Maybe she'd gone somewhere else and just hadn't wanted to say. But I knew deep down I was just grasping at straws. There was only one way to be sure. I got in the car and headed toward her office. She'd mentioned once or twice that she sometimes went in on weekends, especially when things got hectic. If she wasn't with Laura, maybe she really was at work. That's what I told myself. But with every mile I drove, the pit in my stomach grew deeper. I had no idea what I was about to find. Only that, whatever it was, I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine anymore. When I pulled into the parking lot, it was almost empty. No surprise, it was a Saturday. Most people aren't crazy enough to spend their weekends at work. But then I spotted Rachel's car parked near the front entrance and my chest tightened. A part of me wanted to believe it was a good sign, that she really was here catching up on work, just like she'd said. But there was a small, persistent voice whispering in my ear, "Don't be naive." I stepped inside and walked through the quiet halls, past rows of lifeless cubicles and offices cloaked in shadows. Just a few people dotted the space, probably trying to wrap up whatever they hadn't finished during the week. None of them looked twice at me as I moved through the corridor toward Rachel's office. She had gotten a promotion a few months earlier, finally had an office of her own, complete with a window view. I remember how proud she'd been, how we'd popped open a bottle of wine that night to celebrate. That memory felt so distant now, like it belonged to someone else's life. As I approached her office, I noticed the door was cracked open. Not wide, just enough to catch a glimpse of what was inside. My heart was thudding against my ribs, but I tried to keep my steps calm, steady. Maybe she'd just forgotten to shut it all the way. I pushed the door open gently, slowly, and then I saw it. Rachel was in the office, but she wasn't alone. She was half reclined on her desk, her blouse undone, her back arched against the glass surface. Standing between her legs was a man I recognized, Kevin. One of the new hires. She'd mentioned him a few times, casually, like he was just another name in the building. Now I could see there was nothing casual about it. They were completely caught up in each other, so focused, so locked in, they didn't even realize the door had moved. Didn't see me standing there in the doorway frozen. Like I'd walked into someone else's nightmare. I couldn't move. Couldn't speak. It felt like something inside me had cracked wide open. My brain struggled to process what my eyes were seeing, like I was watching a movie on mute. It didn't feel real. It couldn't be real. Kevin's hands were at her waist, like he'd done it 100 times before. Rachel was whispering something to him, something quiet that made him grin. That grin, it wasn't playful. It was familiar. Like this was normal for them. Like they belonged to each other in that moment. I wanted to shout. To demand an explanation. But no words came out. Just this heavy, pulsing silence. Eventually they noticed me. I'm not sure how long I'd been standing there, but when Rachel finally turned and saw me, her whole body stiffened. Her face went pale, her eyes wide. She shoved Kevin back and started fumbling with her blouse, trying to cover up like she could erase what I'd just witnessed. "Jake," she said, her voice trembling. It's not what it looks like. Not what it looks like. That's what she chose to say. I almost laughed, but it came out hollow, bitter. I'd just seen her wrapped around another man, right there on the desk we celebrated over, and she had the audacity to say it wasn't what it looked like? Really? I said, my voice hoarse. Then what is it? Kevin looked like a deer caught in headlights, his face drained of color. I thought he might run. Rachel stood frozen, hands shaking, her mouth working like she wanted to find the right words, but nothing came out. There was no version of the truth that would undo what I'd seen. No speech that would make it okay. I can explain, she said eventually. But I didn't want explanations. I couldn't handle them. Not then. I didn't wait for her to finish. I turned and walked away, ignoring her voice behind me, the sound of Kevin fumbling with his clothes. My head felt like it was full of static. My body moved on autopilot, one foot in front of the other as I made my way down the hallway and out of the building. I don't even remember the walk to my car. One minute I was inside and the next I was gripping the steering wheel trying to remember how to breathe. I thought I was prepared for anything. I thought I could handle whatever truth I found. But not that. Not the image of the woman I married with someone else, in the office we toasted to not that long ago. I'd spent weeks second-guessing myself, telling myself I was overthinking things. But there was no more denying it now. I had seen it with my own eyes, and that moment, what I saw through that door, was branded into me. The sadness hit me first, this raw, aching sadness that sat heavy in my chest. But as I started the car and pulled away, something else took over. Anger. A slow, cold rage that burned brighter the more I thought about it. About how she had lied to my face night after night. About how she had let me believe I was crazy for suspecting something was wrong. I wasn't going to let her destroy everything we built without consequences. And that's when the idea came to me, clear as day. Before I left the building, before I even stepped back into the hallway, I had pulled out my phone. The door had been just open enough, the angle perfect. My hands were shaking, but I hit record. I filmed it. All of it. Every second. The proof I never wanted but knew I would need. It wasn't about revenge. Not entirely. It was about the truth. And I wasn't going to let her rewrite it. Sitting there in my car, I replayed the video just once. Just long enough to confirm I had everything. And as I watched, that familiar burn started rising again. Anger, betrayal, humiliation. All of it twisting in my gut. But instead of letting it overtake me, I shifted gears. I told myself I had to be smart. Calm. Strategic. I wasn't going to lose my mind over this. I was going to make it count. When I got home, I didn't waste a second. I headed straight for the study, opened my laptop, and started typing. I drafted an anonymous email addressed to the HR department at Rachel's company. It was short, professional, but sharp. I mentioned how Rachel had been a model of leadership, especially in terms of fostering close ties with her junior staff. That part stung, and I meant it too. I even tossed in a cruel line about how she probably spent more time on her desk than working at it. It was petty. It was pointed. And I didn't care. I attached the video. No signature, no details, just a note asking them to reevaluate whether she was the kind of person they wanted running a team. I didn't know if it would spark an investigation or get buried under a pile of corporate red tape. But I knew this much. Rachel's carefully polished image was about to take a hit. She'd spent years climbing that ladder, gaining respect, earning a reputation. And now she could try to talk her way out of this just like she'd sweet-talked her way into Kevin's arms. But this time there'd be a cost. I wasn't going to let her off easy. Once I hit send, I leaned back and let out a long breath. The fury hadn't faded, not by a long shot, but there was something else now, something colder. Satisfaction. I'd made my move, and it was just the beginning. After that, I pulled open the drawer where we kept important documents and found our marriage contract. Rachel had been the one to suggest a prenup before we got married, said it was just a precaution, something to protect both of us, just in case. At the time, I hadn't thought twice about it. I trusted her. I never imagined either of us would ever actually need it. But right there, printed in black and white, was the clause I had all but forgotten. If either party committed infidelity, they forfeited any right to alimony, assets, or shared property. One betrayal, and the guilty party walked away with nothing. Suddenly, it felt like a rope thrown to a drowning man. The next morning I called Frank, my attorney. He's sharp, no nonsense, and not the kind of guy who wastes time with small talk. I told him everything briefly. When I mentioned the clause about cheating, I could practically hear him nodding through the phone. "You've got what you need, Jake," he said. "Just document everything. Text messages, emails, anything else you can find. That video is a solid start, but if she tries to fight it, we'll want to shut every door. I'll dig up whatever I can," I told him. "Just make sure she doesn't walk away with a dime." Frank didn't hesitate. "She signed the contract. She knew what it meant. We'll hold her to it. I'll get the paperwork going. In the meantime, get everything else lined up." When we ended the call, I felt a shift inside me. Not just anger anymore, but something harder. A resolve. She had thrown our life away like it meant nothing. Well, she could keep the affair. I was going to keep everything else. The next few hours passed in a blur. I went through the house room by room, boxing up every single thing that belonged to her. Clothes, shoes, makeup, all of it. I didn't fold anything. I didn't stop to reminisce. Just dumped it into boxes, bag after bag, until not a single trace of her was left in the house. I even came across a couple of items I didn't recognize. Gifts, maybe? Little trinkets that didn't feel like they were ever meant for me. I didn't bother asking. I threw them in the trash. Then I picked up the phone and called her parents. It was awkward. Short. I just told them that Rachel and I were done, and that I'd be dropping off her things. I didn't offer details. Her mother's voice cracked when she said, "Oh, all right," like she already knew something was wrong. Didn't matter. That wasn't my problem anymore. Later that day, I loaded the car with all her boxes and drove to her parents' house. I didn't knock. I didn't ring the bell. I just started unloading her things onto their porch. Her parents came outside, confused, staring at the pile growing at their feet. I handed them an envelope. Inside were the divorce papers. Nothing else. No letter. No message. "Give this to her," I said. "She'll understand." Then I turned and walked away. Driving home, I expected to feel triumph. Maybe even peace. But all I felt was a strange hollowness, like I'd just torn something vital out of myself and hadn't yet figured out what would replace it. I'd loved Rachel. That much was true. I might have even still loved her before everything collapsed. But that love was gone now, burned out and buried under layers of betrayal and anger. And for the first time, I really let myself wonder, was any of this ever going to make me feel better? Or was it just going to be another scar, one more wound I'd carry with me long after the dust had settled? I thought cutting Rachel out of my life would bring some kind of peace. Maybe not happiness, but at least closure. I had delivered the video to her company, filed the divorce papers, stripped her of anything connected to our marriage, and still I felt like I was stuck in limbo. Like I was just waiting for something else to break. A few days after I dropped her things off at her parents' house, my phone buzzed. It was a call from an old friend of mine, Matt. He and I had known each other for years. We both worked in similar circles, though he was at a different firm. We often swapped war stories about work, so when I saw his name pop up, I didn't think much of it at first. But then I heard the hesitation in his voice. "Hey Jake. I heard something about Rachel," he said, a little uncertain. "You doing all right?" My stomach tightened like it already knew what he was about to say. "Depends. What did you hear?" "There's talk she got fired," Matt said. "Something about an inappropriate relationship with someone she supervised." I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but I remembered you've been kind of quiet lately and I figured, maybe you already knew. I felt my breath catch in my throat. So it had worked. The video, the email, it had reached the right eyes. Rachel wasn't going to walk away clean. "Yeah," I said, keeping my voice even. "It's true. I found out she was involved with one of her junior staff. Looks like the company found out too." Matt let out a long, stunned sigh. "Man, they're not just letting her slip away quietly. People are saying it's bad. Like public kind of bad. She's become the example. Like a warning sign." And there it was, confirmation. The consequences had arrived. The walls were caving in on her just like I'd hoped. But instead of satisfaction, all I felt was nothing. Just this dull ache in my chest, like I'd waited all this time for justice, only to realize it didn't really change anything. "Thanks for checking in," I said, my voice flat. "I'm hanging in. If you ever need to talk, man, seriously. I'm around," Matt said gently. "Nobody deserves what she did to you." "I appreciate it," I said, managing the smallest smile, more habit than emotion. "Take care." We hung up and I just sat there, phone still in my hand. I had expected to feel vindicated when the fallout finally hit. But instead, it felt like watching a building collapse from a distance. Loud, chaotic, and strangely quiet inside. Over the next few days, I kept hearing little updates, through friends, old colleagues, even online chatter. Rachel's name, once spoken with respect in her industry, had become tangled up in scandal. People weren't just whispering, they were talking out loud. No one was defending her. The story was clear. She crossed a line and now she was out. But the most surprising update came when I ran into Susan at the grocery store. She was an old neighbor of ours, someone we'd run into at barbecues and holiday potlucks. She looked surprised to see me, and after a little awkward small talk, the conversation veered where I didn't want it to go. "I heard Rachel moved back in with her parents," she said, lowering her voice like it was some town secret. I kept my expression neutral. "Yeah, figured she would. Not a lot of places left for her to land." Susan raised her brows a little. "I saw her mom the other day, she looked stressed. And let me tell you, she wasn't shy about why. She was venting right there in the produce aisle. Said Rachel had thrown away everything, her marriage, her future, even her dignity, for a fling. She actually said, What kind of fool trades a whole family for 5 minutes of something meaningless? I didn't even know how to respond. I let out a short, bitter chuckle. Of all people, Rachel's mother, always polished, always judging, was now the one calling her daughter a fool. That was rich. She used to look at me like I wasn't good enough for Rachel. Now, she was probably the one handing out guilt trips like candy. Sounds like things aren't going too well for her, I said, letting the satisfaction show. Susan shook her head. Not at all. It's a mess. People can't stop talking about it, how she had everything and just torched it overnight. Honestly, Jake, I don't think anyone saw it coming. I nodded, unsure of what to say. I had spent weeks picturing this exact moment, when the world would see what she'd done, when she'd be exposed for who she really was. And yet, it felt hollow. I thanked Susan and finished my shopping, but her words kept echoing in my head long after I left the store. Rachel had lost everything. Not because of me. Because of her own choices. And still, I couldn't shake the feeling that none of this had fixed anything. It hadn't brought back trust, or peace, or love. It had just drawn a hard line in the sand. And on the other side of that line she was alone. And so was I. On the drive home, my mind drifted back to Rachel, holed up in her childhood bedroom under her parents' roof, with nothing but their judgment and disappointment hanging over her like a storm cloud. I pictured her mom, the same woman who used to gush about Rachel's career, now picking apart every choice she'd made, ripping into her for throwing it all away. I'd wanted to hurt her. I won't pretend otherwise. I wanted her to feel even a fraction of the pain she dumped on me the day I found out the truth. And maybe I got what I wanted. Maybe she was suffering now. But as I pulled into the driveway and stared at the house, something felt off. This place used to feel like a sanctuary. Now it just felt empty. Like the walls still remembered what we'd lost. Sure, Rachel might be paying for her mistakes, but I was still the one left holding the pieces. Picking them up. Trying to figure out what to do next. And for the first time since this whole thing started, I asked myself a hard question. Was revenge ever going to be enough? Maybe not. Maybe it was time to start focusing on something else. On my kids, on our future. Maybe the real win wasn't watching Rachel fall. It was learning how to rise on my own. I thought I'd heard it all. I thought nothing else could hit harder after everything that had already come to light. But then, about a month after the divorce papers were filed, a new curveball landed. I was at the local coffee shop, waiting in line for my usual morning order when I saw Linda, one of Rachel's former co-workers. We hadn't really talked since everything blew up, so when she walked over with that awkward half-smile, I knew something was coming. "Hey Jake," she said, a little hesitant. "You got a minute?" I gave a polite nod. "Sure. What's up?" She glanced around, lowered her voice like she was sharing a state secret. "I'm not sure if you've heard, but Rachel's pregnant." Her words landed like a dull thud in my chest. I froze. Pregnant? I hadn't seen or spoken to Rachel since the day I left her stuff on her parents' porch. Our communication had been strictly through lawyers, cold, calculated, nothing personal. And now this? I didn't have to think too hard. The timing ruled me out. I'd caught her with Kevin weeks before everything unraveled. If she was pregnant now, it wasn't mine. It was his. I forced a shrug, kept my expression unreadable. "Not my concern anymore," I said, my voice coming out colder than I expected. "I hope it works out for her." Linda gave me a look, half pity, half surprise. Like she wasn't sure if she should say more. "Yeah. I just thought you'd want to hear it from someone instead of through whispers." I nodded politely. "Thanks for telling me." We said a few more polite things before parting ways, but I barely heard any of it. My thoughts were buzzing, scrambled by the idea of Rachel pregnant, with Kevin's child. Dealing with it on her own. Living with her parents. The judgment. The regret. The old me? The man who still believed in her, who believed in us. He might have picked up the phone. Might have reached out, asked how she was holding up. But that version of me? He didn't live here anymore. I didn't call her. I didn't text. Not even a message. She made her choice. And now she was living with it. If she thought she could circle back when things got hard, if she thought I'd be her backup plan after all this, she was wrong. That door was shut. Locked. Gone. The only thing I felt was relief. Relief that I had gotten out before things got even messier. Relief that I wasn't going to be roped into raising someone else's child. And most of all, relief that I had my kids. Two incredible little humans who were depending on me to show them what love, strength, and stability really looked like. I started putting my energy into them. We sat down together and started making plans. A beach weekend, just the three of us. A movie night with popcorn, snacks, and no bedtime. I let them choose the films, even the terrible ones. I wanted them to feel like life could still be good, fun, safe, even if their mom wasn't around. Because what mattered now wasn't what Rachel had destroyed. It was what I was going to rebuild. Not long after everything unraveled, I started making changes around the house. Nothing drastic at first, just small, simple things. I moved some furniture around, picked out a new paint color for the living room, even turned the spare bedroom into a playroom for the kids. It was my way of scrubbing the past off the walls, building a space that felt like ours again. No ghosts, no shadows. Just a new beginning. Every now and then I'd still hear whispers about Rachel. People said she rarely left the house. That she barely spoke. That her mom, once so proud, had been overheard saying, "How do you throw away your whole life for nothing?" I didn't let it get to me. Her life was hers to handle now. I wasn't going to carry any more of her baggage. The kids asked about her sometimes. I kept it simple. Honest but gentle. "Mom's not living here right now," I'd tell them. "But we're going to be okay. I'm not going anywhere." And I meant that with every fiber of my being. I focused on giving them what they deserved. A stable, loving home. I started planning trips, making lists, circling dates on the calendar. A beach weekend next summer. Maybe sign them up for that nature camp they'd been begging to go to. The future, for the first time in a long time, felt like something we could shape with our own hands. Rachel's pregnancy? Just another chapter in a story I wasn't part of anymore. Her decisions, her consequences. I had my own path now, and it didn't include looking back. The months passed, and the sharp edges of everything slowly began to dull. Life didn't magically snap back into place, but it began to make sense again. The house grew louder with laughter. We built new routines. Saturday pancakes, movie nights with too much popcorn, impromptu dance parties in the kitchen. Our home started to feel like home again. The last I heard of Rachel came through passing conversations. Someone spotted her at the store, alone, looking worn down. Another said she was still at her parents' place, still struggling. I never asked for updates. I didn't want them. Our lives had forked in different directions, and I was content to let them stay that way. But fate has a sense of humor. I was at a parent-teacher night for my son when I noticed her, Rachel's mother. She looked different. Smaller somehow. Her expression uncertain, like she was carrying something heavy she didn't know how to set down. She walked over with a tight, hesitant smile. "Hi, Jake. It's been a while." "Yeah," I said. "It has." She stood there for a moment, words caught behind her lips. And then quietly she said, "She's not doing well, Rachel. She's been struggling. I think she regrets everything, but she doesn't know how to fix it." Her eyes met mine, pleading, almost. Like she hoped I had an answer that could undo it all. I let out a slow breath. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said. My voice was calm, grounded. "But there's nothing I can do for her now. My focus is on my kids. That's what matters." She nodded, like she'd expected that but needed to hear it anyway. "I understand. Just take care of yourself, Jake. You've been through enough." "Thanks," I said. She turned and walked away, blending into the crowd. And just like that, it felt like a door had finally closed. Not slammed. Just quietly shut. The days kept rolling forward. I signed the kids up for that summer camp. We took that beach trip, just the three of us, toes in the sand, chasing waves and collecting shells. We made memories that had nothing to do with the past. Real ones. Fresh ones. Then one afternoon, the divorce papers arrived in the mail. The final signature. The official stamp. I held the envelope for a long moment, fingers tracing the edge before I opened it and signed. No ceremony. No grief. Just a quiet breath of finality. It was over. Weeks later, we were at the park on a perfect spring day. The sun was warm, the sky clear, and my kids were racing around, their laughter echoing through the air. I stood there watching them, my chest full, not with pain this time but pride. Gratitude. As we were packing up, my phone buzzed. I checked it without thinking. A message from an unknown number. It was Rachel. Just a few lines. "I'm sorry. For everything. I know I can't take any of it back. But I hope someday you'll forgive me. I wish you and the kids all the happiness in the world." I stared at it for a long moment. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I just felt done. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. I slipped the phone into my pocket, took my kids by the hand, and we walked back to the car. The sun dipped low, casting everything in a soft, golden light. For the first time in a long time, I felt whole. Rachel's story had ended in my life. But mine? Mine was just getting started. And as my kids chattered in the back seat, talking over each other about who had run faster and who got the most turns on the swings, I smiled. We had made it through the storm. Now it was time to enjoy the sunshine.